30 seconds now. Drivers will be hearing in their ear and making sure to hit the drive button so as to not end up with the dreaded pit lane start. However, with some drivers may choose to take the pit lane start in order to avoid trouble. We'll see if anybody makes that call today, or if we're going to be sending 27 cars into turn 1, which should hopefully be a wonderful show. As Saba now rolls off the line in his Porsche as the formation lap begins. And one time around will be calm, the next will be chaos as this field begins 60 minutes of racing at Kyalami here in South Africa. It's the ARL Console Multiclass Sundays, second round of this preseason, as we all become accustomed to what is sure to be an unbelievable championship. The 747 of Fagan already staying very close to that Porsche. So we'll take a look into the field now at Dalton, as we were provided a spectacular camera angle here. There we go. There is our GT4 leader in the McLaren, followed by 5 Mercedes. That'll surely be a fun battle to follow throughout the race, as we had excellent clashes at the front of GT4 all race last week. And we return to the front of the field now with Saba's Porsche, as he looks to defend his checkered flag from last week. Rolling onto the back half of the circuit now, we do have a car in pit lane. That is the 420 of Adeno in his Mustang. I'll have to see if that's a strategic move or an unfortunate circumstance by result of not hitting the drive button. But we'll have to see how that works out for the Mustang as this thing gets underway. And we send now 26 cars into this sharp left-hander. Saba really warming the brakes up now, as we now get double file. As we now come onto the back straight and get this thing underway. As we now roll onto the front stretch and approach the line. Red lights. And now we go to rolling down the straight. Green lights. We have a drive-through for the 274. Fagan making a move to the inside. On the outside here, but Saba manages to break away. Fagan doesn't have a great line attacking. Oh, is he holding on? We have some wobbling in the slightly behind. It's a huge cut from Fagan to get in front of Studer and hold his position. It's Brandon blocks him with the penalty in the 274 Ferrari. As Saba's holding on here from Fagan, who is staying close and on the attack. We have a few cars that have fallen back now. The 5 GT4 is rolling off as we have a yellow flag as well. We'll quickly move now to the GT4s, as we find Duffin has taken the lead and gotten by Dalton, and is followed by Yo and Chicas and Audrey the Squirrel, It is Duffin now leading the GT4 class from Dalton and Yo. We go back to the front of the overall class in the GT4 or the GT3s, as Saba's managed to make a slight gap now to Tom Fagan, with Max Studer behind and JC Ampero and the fellow Porsche in fourth place. As now we have 2 Porsches and 2 McLarens rounding out our top 4, followed by the Ferrari of Ramsell, the Aston Martin of Hunt, and the Ferrari of Bloxham, but he'll have to stop with his drive-through for speeding at the start, which is a rather tough one, as Fagan now is going to go on the attack, but Saba is moving out of the way on the straight, disrupting the air on the front of that McLaren, and hopefully keeping him at bay for the attack on through turn 1, which Fagan does not get. At the front, we have sorted into some sort of neat order here. It's Saba leading Fagan, leading Studer, Ampero, and Ramsell, as we'll go back now to the GT4s. It's Duffin in the lead, Dalton on the attack. They've picked it right up from where we ended last week in Zolder, as we have the McLaren of Dalton absolutely gnawing at the back of that Mercedes. He's going to attack the outside. Dalton to the outside. Can he make it stick? They make slight contact, but they both hold on to it. Dalton lines him up again, is staying close, but Duffin has the advantage still. And Chikas in that GT3 has worked his way through the GT4s into 12th overall. He'll be chasing after a top 10 at this point, as Duffin goes wide, kicks up the dust, and Dalton is going to go on the attack to the outside. Once again, Duffin uses up the curb, holds the middle of the track, holding a decent defensive line here. And Dalton gets his McLaren to the inside now. He chucks it in. Duffin and Dalton still giving us a show. They have not stopped from last week. These two are going right at it, with Yo and Squirrel right behind them, looking to collect. If these two collide, we've seen nothing but unbelievably clean and drastic racing from Dalton and Duffin at the top of this GT4 field, as Bloxham clears his drive-through in that Ferrari. And Dalton again going on the attack. This time he's going to try the outside of T1. As in the GT3 field, it seems to be once again... Oh, Dalton's had an error here. It seems Duffin and Dalton both had a slightly shocking corner there, as the Mercedes of Darren Yo looks to get into the equation here and is now attacking Dalton. Let's move back there to see what's happening with this battle. We'll follow Yo. Now with Audrey the Squirrel now going to make a move, as once again at the top of this GT4 field, it is nothing but unbelievable scenes and battles from the start here in Kyalami. It's the Mercedes, followed by the McLaren, followed by 3 more Mercedes, and then the Audi of Will Garwood. But Duffin now establishes a slightly more comfortable gap to Dalton. As we continue into this race, over 5 minutes gone now already. And we'll return to the front of the pack, as Saba's opened up a sizable lead now on Fagan. And that Porsche is once again looking absolutely mighty. And we'll check now on the 420 of Adonel in that Mustang, who's managed to work his way back up to 21st overall, cutting his way through this GT4 field. This should be fun to watch the Mustang absolutely dice through these slower cars. with the Mercedes GT4 of Leach behind. Let's check back in with this battle at the front. As Duffin now holding station about 2-3 car lengths back to Dalton with that 7/10 gap. And this seems to have calmed down for the moment. Is Dalton holding back? And maybe not. He brakes much later there than Duffin. And once again, they are still just nose to tail. These two cannot stop battling. Duffin using a lot of that inside curb there. As there's our top three once again coming through here. It's Duffin, Dalton, and Yo. Duffin's had it off. He goes ridiculously wide. He goes wide, and the two other GT4 leaders are going to slip by. That's an off from Duffin. That's Dalton into the GT4 lead. Yo into second place now, as Duffin is not going to be happy with himself. As now he's got to get back his Mercedes back past those other two drivers. And Peter Dalton now establishes the lead of the GT4 class. That is 13th overall. You'd have to think the McLaren driver is going to hope with how this thing shakes out and how the attrition of racing goes over 60 minutes that he can bring his GT4 up into the top 10 positions. But that is a massive, massive turn of events at the top of the GT4 field as Duffin goes way off and is passed by the previous... that's a poor word choice there, but by the following two drivers now. And Dalton puts the pressure on, forces the mistake, and puts his McLaren into P1 in class. As Darren Yo also sniffs opportunity now and is staying fairly close to that McLaren. But they will continue to battle it out here at the front of this GT4 class. We will return now to the overall lead with Miguel Saba. And firmly in P1 with that Porsche, picking up where he left off as well last week, taking the win convincingly after the retirements of Clouden and Woodall Jr., both of whom he battled with, both of whom he overcame until Woodall took the lead on pit strategy. However, it didn't last. Saba brought his Porsche to the front and to victory lane, as he looks to be on course to do the same thing here today. Just blisteringly consistent in that Porsche. As Bloxham, after his drive-through, has worked his way up to 11th and picked up that place at the back of the main GT3 field. And we'll return now to the front of the GT4s. As now the camera picks up Dalton, and Yo is right on his tail. These two battling is going to look fantastic for Duffin, and these three all going at it is going to look fantastic for Raji the Squirrel, sitting behind them by a few seconds now, but hopefully will give him an opportunity to catch up and get back in this mix at the front of this field. But these three are looking mighty. As well, it looks like we have a Mustang on track. That'll be the that'll be the 420 of Adenel, who seems to have fallen back once again and lost some position. So we'll have to see what's happened there, as the GT3 is 2 laps down now. But we still have Dalton at the front in that number 7 McLaren. starting to open up maybe just a slight gap to the Mercedes behind, about half a second now, as Duffin is working on Yo and wanting to fight his way back up to the front after his unfortunate off earlier in the race that surrendered the lead to Dalton and saw him step down 2 places on the podium. And we now have Shelby in that Porsche. Gorgeous livery on that in the 43. Also approaching these top 3 drivers, so we'll have to see. Yeah, coming through the corner now, that Porsche is slowly working into the equation. As we now are 12 minutes or so into this race, already seeing fantastic action and drama at the front of the GT4 class, and seemingly business as usual from the GT3s. It's Miguel Saba followed by Tom Fagan and Max Studer. Convincingly, the class of the field in GT3 at this point are those 3. We have some cheers for Studer in the broadcast chat. As we see some support now for our drivers, which is always cool to see. But it is Saba now approaching the GT4s. This is going to be fun to watch, as my game just crashed. That's terrific. We'll get right back to the action shortly. How unfortunate is that? We will return in a moment. We return to the action now. As I believe we're running along. Here we have Saba. Let me get back to my proper camera angles. Here we go. Saba cutting his way through the GT4 field at the front of the GT3s. Looks like Hunt is going to have a stop-go penalty that I assume is going to be for speeding in the pit lane. And Dalton now has opened up a decent gap to Duffin behind, who's taken back P2 from his teammate Darren Yeo as the two Simplay drivers chase down the McLaren of Peter Dalton, who looks to avenge his loss from last week as he got so close so many times to making that move on Duffin for the GT4 win, but it was Matthew Duffin who held on and looked to be doing so early on in this one as well until a slight off saw him go wide, overshoot a corner, and the McLaren snuck by as the Aussie took the lead and looks to not give it back, opening up some space now. As it seems as though we've had some sort of incident, or... Oh yes, Miguel Sabo is in the pits. It'd be a real shame if we miss something important here, but Saba is in the pits, dropping down the order, our race leader. And it looks like, is that stop done? We'll have to follow that. But Tom Fagan now at the front of this field, followed by Max Studer 2.5 seconds behind. With JC Ampero in P3, filling out the podium right now as Saba continues to sit on pit road. You have to wonder what's happened here to our previous leader, as the Porsche falls way down to a P11 now, with Tom Fagan now taking point. McLaren's topping both charts now in both classes, with Fagan and Max Studer with their McLarens at the front of the GT3 class, and Peter Dalton at the front of his, and Saba still in the pits. He must have had an absolute shocker. But we have to know what's happened here. This is extremely unfortunate. As now for the third time, we've had a leader had a problem at the front of GT3. There doesn't seem to be too much damage on that car. So you really just have to wonder what happens. But who's not curious and is only focusing now on the checkered flag in 40 minutes is this man, Tom Fagan, in the 747 McLaren, and he is indeed flying. Now a second and a half, at 1.6 ahead of Max Studer behind. These two are having a fantastic clash for what would end up being P2 last week. But now it seems to be this battle is for the win as Saba has fallen out of it. And JC Ampero will also be thrilled about this as he's promoted to the podium as it stands. But our new leader and one to watch at the front of this pack now, it is Tom Fagan in that 720 S Evo. As he is now looking to be approaching, I believe that is Darren Yeo in the 35. As this will get interesting now, we'll go back to Peter Dalton and we'll follow him as our overall leader, Tom Fagan, begins to cut his way through these GT4 class leaders. And we'll see if he can do it without losing much time to Studer behind. As Shelby in the GT3 Porsche has also made his way through, as there goes Fagan putting the lap on Dalton. And These GT3s now effectively finished cutting through these GT4s until they start to reach the lappers. And we'll see how Max Studer is doing with these guys as well, as he's gotten by Yo and he's gotten by Duffin. Will he get by Dalton? Throwing it to the outside, making the move. Dalton gives him no trouble, but that's brought those two a little bit closer by the looks of things. Although it seems as though Fagan had a little bit better time coping with those lap cars. But still through that sequence, no trouble, no harm done. It's Fagan P1, Studer P2. Let's take a look at Ampero. Holding station on his own. Nothing too busy around him. Another 5 seconds back to Robert Ramsell in his Ferrari, who's working now on the 313. That looks to be another one of the Simplay Mercedes of Leach. That's Gary Leach. But Fagan now stretching it out. It's a 3.8 second lead to Max Studer as he goes to lap now one of the GT3s of Shelby. We'll take a look at the GT4 situation as once again, here's Duffin now. We're finally going to get to see the reverse order of the fantastic battles we've seen to this point. As this McLaren-Mercedes clash continues, is Duffin going to go to try to make a move on Dalton here? He's not quite close enough just yet. Dalton pulling out a slight advantage during that sequence. And Yo is going to try to hold on to these two as Duffin bites a little bit of the grass there once again. But that tiny, speedy little McLaren is holding station. Duffin now lining him up, grabbing as much slipstream as possible down the short chute. As Dalton seems to generally be stronger through the middle of the track, pulling out a little bit of a gap until Duffin closes it back in through Sector 3. But this will go down to the wire once again, barring any sort of calamity. Oh, Duffin moves to the inside. He's going to take a look. Is he close enough to try and make a move? Doesn't look like it. He might have bitten slightly early coming off the throttle. Is there going to be contact here, or is the Porsche of Shelby? No, is that which Porsche is that? Oh, Saba's back on track now as well. Also working his way past Duffin here. As things are all sorts of mixed up at the front. That's Ampero, the P3 Porsche, working his way through, followed by Saba there. So Saba out of the picture in his Porsche, Ampero very much in the picture in P3 with his Porsche. But it's Tom Fagan still at the top of this field, holding on, as Max Studer has barely made a dent in that gap. It's 3.5 seconds about from P1 to P2 overall in the GT3s. As the Irish driver is now looking to make a move on the Camaro, hitting the flashers. He wants him to get out of the way. Fagan wants this win. He is showing no patience, and rightfully so. As Max Studer goes into the pits now, seems to be playing the opposite strategy as he did before, going a little bit earlier, rather than going a lot later, as he did last week. As the cars begin to trundle by now, that's going to see Studer go back down to P5 at least. He'd worked himself a decent gap. We're going to see how this pit strategy works out for him in that McLaren as Tom Fagan continues to push at the front of this field, and now a 22-second lead from P1 to P2. That's between Fagan and Ampero in that Porsche, followed by Robert Ramsell in the 501 Ferrari. And we're going to look back now at the front of the GT4 as Dalton still has a somewhat respectable gap to Duffin in the Simplate Mercedes. Followed by Yo still, followed by Audrey the Squirrel in P4 in class. With Gary Leach rounding out that top 5, but it is these two at the front continuing to put on a show that they have not stopped putting on since about halfway through last week's race. And it really does work out for all of us, as this is some unbelievable action in the GT4 class. Shikas in the Mercedes GT3 now pitting. He is 2 laps down. As Studer's come out of the pits in 7th position, right in the mix behind McMillan. And I believe that is Gary Leach in the GT4. So a GT3 and a GT4 to deal with for Max Studer. Keep in mind, though, that Mustang of McMillan has not pitted yet. But this GT4 is not making it easy for Studer, as now Max goes to the inside and puts his McLaren past that lower class Mercedes. That didn't sound quite well the way I wanted it to. And this is now Studer going to try and pick up some positions again during this pit cycle. He does not want any traffic in front of him, at least as little as possible, in order to make this undercut work, as it's Darren Yo into the pits now from P3 in the GT4 class. Will Studer make a move here? He's working on McMillan for P6, but this is currently provisional P2 for Max Studer. He has a decent enough gap back to Ampero before the pit cycle that this type of thing won't really prevent too much of a gap from closing behind. Not so much that it would concern Studer, but what he is concerned with is trying to maintain or pick up time on Tom Fagan after Fagan makes his stop. But he's made his move on McMillan now, so that's going to see Max Studer back up to P6 after his pit stop, and coming out P7. Brandon blocks him after his penalty at the stop of the race, holding station in P5. Now he's going into the pits. Fagan still out and trying to deal with this GT4. And as Ampero still settling into P2, 23 seconds behind now. We are halfway into this thing. We've hit 30 minutes to go on the clock. And it's been a great show so far. Tom Fagan at the front overall after our leader for the beginning, and our winner last week, Miguel Saba, had an incident of some kind which we unfortunately missed due to a technical dropout. As we now have Dalton and Duffin on the same pit cycle. Dalton's done his stop first and works his way out. These two are going to be neck and neck. What a battle we have now coming right into the pits. It's Duffin and Dalton at the front of the GT4 field. Are any of them going to get cheeky coming off the pit line? Dalton's got a great launch. Duffin going right outside. We'll see who makes a move as they come into. Here's Duffin. He's just barely got the inside. He takes a look. He's on the bumper now. He's trying to stay with him through this sequence of corners. Dalton's typically been faster through here earlier, but now it's Duffin with a better exit here, getting his car alongside. Is he quite there? He's going to the outside here for this next corner. Doesn't quite hold on to it. Slots back in behind the McLaren. Is he going to look to the inside now through the right-hander? Duffin's there. They're about equal on the brakes. Coming through the corner now. Duffin does look to be ahead. Duffin's gotten the move done. It's Matthew Duffin back to the front of the GT4s. He gets the move done on Dalton. He sets it up coming out of the pit box. What an unbelievable sequence between these two. The Brit and the Aussie once again giving us a show, but Dalton is going to stay on the attack. What an amazing, amazing rivalry this is shaping up to be at the front of the GT4s. Peter Duffin, Matthew Duffin. Dalton goes back for another move and takes the lead. They are side by side still. Dalton now with the advantage. But that isn't much of an advantage as Duffin is going to take it back. Duffin and Dalton continuing their clash. With this amazing battle as Peter Dalton takes point once again in that Mercedes. As we have the faster Aston Martin GT3 making his way through, not disrupting much of this fantastic clash though at front. I gotta find a new phrase to use as Duffin gets right back on the bumper. But Dalton gets down on the power earlier here. His McLaren holds on slightly better through this technical section of racetrack. Leach now holds the class lead for GT4 provisionally, as he has yet to pit, and he's currently stuck behind a Mustang that he is not going to be super thrilled about. That is the number 420 of Adenel, who's after a very, very unfortunate pit lane start and a further incident, ended up 2 laps down. But Leach is going to take his time and see what he can make work with pit strategy here. But Dalton and Duffin are still putting on an absolute show at the front. It is the Aussie driver still holding on to the advantage, though. Now he's slightly worked up a gap. A fantastic, fantastic tilt after the pit cycle that started the moment Duffin pulled out of his pit box. Quite literally, his bumper inside of Dalton's car. What a fantastic, fantastic battle. This is where my analyst would chime in if I had one. If you're interested in doing analyst work with me, hit me up. Anyway, Dalton now extending the gap down the back stretch, or the front stretch, I should say. And Duffin is quick through this corner. Duffin's always quick through this corner, but Dalton is able to cope with the quick right-hander a lot better in that McLaren. Leach still holding on to the class lead. We'll see how long that lasts, how long he can extend, and what that will do for him strategy-wise. As it seems like Fagan has pitted as well. His pit stop is done. It's brought Studer's strategy has worked, as he's now just about 2 seconds behind Fagan. So his strategy picked up about a second, as Studer's going to really, really throw it into that corner. He sees Fagan ahead of him now, as these two know that this is going to be the battle for the win of this race, assuming nothing else happens. It's Butler at the front with the provisional lead in that Mustang, but Fagan is right behind. As Butler remains one of the only GT3s who has yet to make a stop, now being held up by that Aston GT4, and now Fagan is going to make the move and takes the lead back on attrition, doesn't need the pit cycle. That's Tom Fagan, the Irish driver, back into the lead. He's going to work on moving past that GT4 now. And it's clear air for the moment for Tom Fagan at the front of this overall field in his McLaren GT3. And Studer now is going to want to get by these guys as well, as quickly as possible. Seems as though he's made the move on the Aston. There he goes, making his way by the GT4, and now he's going to want to get by and pass the Mustang of Butler as soon as he can, and not allow Fagan to slip away again and lose the advantage that he picked up over the pit cycle. But every moment that the Mustang stays in front of that McLaren, and it looks like Studer's getting the flashers on, he knows that that Mustang hasn't pitted yet. But this is all good news for Tom Fagan, not the best news in the world for Max Studer, as Ampero through the pit cycle has gone back to 5th, Ramsel taking back 4th, but that will cycle back out slightly more when Butler takes his pit stop. Srini Vasan having a much better race than last week, holding on to P6 after that dreadful start. As Leach now pits at the front of the GT4 field, we'll see where he cycles back out. Saba did not take a valid stop earlier in this race. Whatever time he spent in the pits did not register as a valid stop, so he still is going to have to make a pit stop as well. In this recovery drive, he currently sits 14th. And Dalton and Duffin continuing to battle it out here relentlessly at the front of the GT4 field. Nothing but drama between these two, and they have given us a non-stop spectacle since last week. Continuing now, Duffin's going to make up whatever advantage he can through this first corner and through with the slipstream, and try to do what he can to counteract the advantage that Dalton has with that McLaren, both throwing it through T1. But T2, once again, better power, better acceleration on the smaller McLaren through this part of the racetrack. We'll take a look further back now, see what other battles we can find. As Leach is now filtered back out, P5 in class. Audrey the Squirrel is ahead through the pit cycle, as Bender and May are also in the pits in their GT4s. Not much other side-by-side bumper action in the GT4s. Let's see what we can find in the GT3 field as we got guys pitting. We do have Bloxham. I was about to say, about to make the move on Lopez in the Aston Martin, but overcooks it. Saba's going to try to come through now and make a move. Although he's a lap down, that's an unfortunate time for us to cut to Bloxham. He's not going to love that sequence of corners. Srinivasan still at the pits, might start falling down the order, and in fact he has. And McMillan is working on, this looks to be Garwood in that Audi GT4. We've definitely got commotion. But Tom Fagan is still sitting comfortably ahead now. It's almost just above 4-second gap from Fagan to Max Studer as the Irish driver pulls as much slipstream as possible out of that corner off the Mercedes. These two are winding and weaving. It's a stop and go for Srinivasan for speeding in the pit lane, which is going to make that dreadful stop even worse. He spent a lot of time stationary. But this is going to shake out nicely for Saba, who might be able to get a spot back, but we'll have to see depending on when he serves that stop and if it plays into his hands. And Duffin and Dalton Always reliable. Late on the brakes from the Mercedes, as he is glued to the back of that McLaren. Duffin is trying to force the issue. Dalton takes a lot of grass there. As they sweep through now. What do we have from Duffin, the Simplay driver? Once again, late on the brakes, rolls it through the corner, gets close. What can he do on the power now? Sitting in the slipstream. Not quite close enough. Dalton's able to hold it a little bit more quickly through the left-hander. And Duffin's going to get late on the brakes. It looks like there's contact. A slight bump draft. Is that damage from Duffin? We'll have to see next time he gets on the brakes if that's damage or if that is some form of communication from the British driver to the Aussie. It'll be interesting to see. We have more flashers here. What is going on with these two? They seem to be getting a little bit testy with each other. Was it braking from Dalton, or was it too early from Dalton, or was it too late from Duffin? It's tough to tell, but we do know we had a little bit of contact now between our front two drivers who have kept it clean, as Tom Fagan now slips in here and is putting another lap on these GT4 drivers at the front of the overall field. No commotion from him. He is getting this move done. He does not want to see Max Studer in his rearview mirror at all again in this race, as the 747 takes off into the distance ahead of these GT4s. We'll have to see how the rest of these 17 minutes, what a quick one this has felt like. But we'll have to see how the rest of these 17 minutes shake out. It's a little bit more of an aggressive push from Duffin. Goes wide, takes a bit of curb and a little bit of a fishtail. We'll have to see how this goes. Dalton still with the advantage. And here comes Max Studer and his McLaren, still on the chase, doing whatever he can to mitigate to mitigate the leader of Fagan from opening up even more of a gap that currently sits at about 4.5 seconds. These two aren't being quite polite with each other, but Studer gets through, gets past Dalton. This is going to hold up the McLaren of Dalton just a little bit. Duffin starts to get close again. Who's going to get the better exit here? Is the Mercedes going to get close enough? He's tucked into the slipstream. And that Mercedes power isn't able to get the job done. You have to wonder which one, if one of these two has damage or what's going on. As we have an Assetto coming out of the pits now, that explains probably why the McLaren of Dalton was putting the flashers on there in the middle of the straight. But once again, we've seen it lap after lap. It never gets old. We have different outcomes every time. Last time we had contact. Are we going to see contact again between these two as we approach 15 minutes to go here at Kyalami? South Africa's delivered a lot of thrills so far and unexpected results and circumstances, with Saba having to take a long early stop, promoting Tom Fagan to the front of the field. The Irish driver looking to take a win. Max Studer has been on the charge behind him. Played an interesting strategy in the pits that did work to close the gap between the two, but working through lap traffic and all of the commotion in the GT4s has resulted in Studer settling back into about a 5-second gap now. He'll still be holding on to every bit of optimism he has, though, to get back to the bumper of his fellow McLaren driver. Speaking of fellow McLaren drivers, we now have Dalton looking to put the lap on Garwood. And Duffin is right there as well to sniff the opportunity. He gets by the Audi. Wild camera shake here, and Duffin with another attack. Dalton goes quite wide there, but seems to have grabbed the speed from it. It's a good exit from Dalton. And in the background, we have Butler in looking to get the GT4 out of the way of his Mustang. In P3 still, Butler has yet to pit. He's going to try and, it seems as though he's going as long as possible to open up a gap to Ramsell and Ampero behind and see if he can put himself on this podium. It's currently 14 seconds between the Mustang and the Ferrari. Not sure how that's quite going to work out. But we'll have to see how it goes. And now these two, Duffin and Dalton, once again, putting a lap on the GT4s. Butler is approaching now. In the middle of splitting the leaders, so this isn't going to look super great for Dalton, especially with the Mustang being an absolute bucket in the corners. It is unbelievably fast on the straights, as now the Ford gets itself out of the equation and ahead of the GT4 of Peter Dalton. At the front of this field now, I believe that is Bender in the Alpine. David Bender. And Dalton's going to get the job done on making on lapping the Alpine there. And Duffin is going to want to get close and also cut through these guys as quickly as possible. As there we have Saba coming into the picture as well. Miguel Saba, I believe this move is going to be for position as he blindingly passes the McLaren down the straight. And I believe that is going to see Miguel Saba up to P13 overall, doing what he can to recover this race after his early mishap. I could be wrong, but I do believe that Saba has gotten back onto the same lap as the GT4s. Yes, we see it now in the leaderboard. That has changed positions. Let's take a look overall here. In the GT4s, it's Dalton from Duffin, from Yo, from Leach, from Squirrel, with Christopher Shane, Barrett, Dreezy, Neumann, and Bender behind them. Rounding out the top 10. At the front, we have Tom Fagan, we have Max Studer, we have Butler, Robert Ramsell, JC Ampero, Carlos Lopez, Brandon Bloxham, Chicas, McMillan, and Adenel. Adenel has recovered to P10 in class after his unfortunate start. But unfortunately for Miguel Saba, our pole sitter, our winner last week, and our leader for the first good chunk of this race, it is still P13 in class, although has recovered overall, but still plenty of time for a driver as fast as himself to recover a few more spots in class, as he is now only, well, he is 2 laps behind Srini Vasan, but we'll have to see if Saba can make any more progress through this field. Points aren't going to matter quite as much because these are preseason events, but you have to think for the confidence and for the sake of understanding their own consistency. As Dalton goes wide, Duffin's going to come in close. We have the Ferrari behind. Is this Ramsell? I believe it is. Yes, that's Robert Ramsell making the move to lap these two GT4s. Ramsell currently P4 overall in that Ferrari 296, the number 501. Fagan here still seems to be making his way through lap traffic, of course, but a healthy lead, even more healthy than before, the Max Studer in P2. It's looking to be about 7-8 seconds now for the Irish driver ahead, as he's now working on the BMW here. Hitting the flashers, letting him know to get out of the way. That McLaren is orders of magnitude faster. But as our check-in on the leader, as we go back now to Dalton and the GT4 battle. Oh, as Duffin sends it way into the corner and into the back of the GT, I believe that was a GT3. Unbelievable. Duffin is going to have damage from that, which might hinder his charge to try and take the win back from Dalton. What an unbelievable turn of events there. Those Mercedes brakes just did not work the way that Matthew Duffin wanted them to, but it is still P2 in class. And I have to imagine he's going to just hold on despite whatever damage and try to make this happen. Because we're going to try and evaluate what damage is on that Mercedes. It does seem to be minimal. From what we can see anyway, but we'd have to wonder what the suspension or the handling is looking like. But Duffin, with a slight mishap too late on the brakes, overcooks it and makes contact with a driver other than Dalton, who takes the opportunity to open this gap up to now almost a second and a half, as he is looking to avenge his second place from last week and move himself up one spot. Almost 8 minutes to go. At Kyalami here, it's Tom Fagan at the lead overall in his McLaren GT3. It's Peter Dalton at the front of the GT4 field in his McLaren GT4. So it's a great day for the Maccas, looking to take 2 class wins as well as P2 in overall, as Max Studer is comfortably in second place, which will be a result he'll be happy with, since it is an improvement over last week. However, he won't be thrilled that he was in the hunt for the win and hasn't managed to capitalize just yet. Oh! Duffin making huge contact with Ampero there. What was that? It might have been just a bad follow for the slipstream. I highly doubt that was an intentional hook, but Ampero is not going to be thrilled with Duffin at all. That's 2 other cars that Duffin's made contact with in this one in the last handful of laps. But contact with the wall for Ampero, that's going to have damage. You're going to wonder how that's going to affect his race at all. As we see that Butler in the Mustang still has not pitted. We are closing in on 6 minutes to go in this tilt. And Butler has not had service done on his Ford. We're going to see what happens to the strategy as far as this goes. Ramsel's only 2 seconds behind. Ampero's now looking to make this move on Duffin. And Dalton is just enjoying this and the time it's giving him and the gap it's giving him as Ampero finally makes the move. And you have to think, I believe, we'll take a look at Duffin here once again to see if those flashing lights, was that Ampero going off? Yes, it was. We'll have to take a look at Duffin's headlights here to see if they flash going into the braking zone, to see if, once again, if that was intentional or if that was a matter of damage causing his lights to flash. It doesn't look like we're seeing anything here going into the braking zone into the final corner, and Duffin is going to resume his charge on Peter Dalton. Ampero in the background now, still sitting P5. 26 seconds behind Ramsel in P4. Dalton still, no, Butler still yet to pit, 7.5 seconds. Ampero's looking to get the move back done on Dalton, or on Duffin, I'm sorry. The faster car is going to get ahead, the Porsche ahead of the Mustang, or, my goodness, ahead of the Mercedes, and looking to work on Dalton to put the lap on the GT4. Will he get that done tidily? Or this non-stop drama at the front of GT4 doesn't seem to be able to calm itself down up here. And this is a delightful for all of us watching and all of us looking to see what to expect from this championship on 4 ARL console multi-class Sundays. It looked like Adenel was in the pits there for a moment. Saba has not managed to pick up any more places in category. Butler still yet to pit. You gotta wonder when that's gonna happen. With Ramsell right behind him, it seems as though Butler is making the gamble potentially for P5 or P6. Because otherwise I don't quite see this strategy working out for P3 or P5. But there may be an advantage yet. We'll have to see what happens in these last 3.5 minutes. It is close. Tom Fagan at the front of the field, 15-ish seconds now. Approaching, by the looks of it, Audrey the Squirrel to put the lap on the GT4. Tom Fagan is going to be thrilled with how today has gone for him. Relatively drama-free, aside from a slight closing of the gap from Studer behind through the pit cycle. Other than that, Fagan took the lead after Saba went into the pits and was in the pits for a good while and has not looked back, has not had a thought of looking back. That 747 McLaren has been hooked up. It has been smooth and consistent. He has chopped through the lap traffic. It's been a convincing drive from Fagan today. Will definitely make him one to watch in this championship at the front of the GT3 class. At the front of the GT4 class, Dalton now with a bit more of an advantage over Duffin. It's about 1.1 seconds. As we are within 2.5 minutes to go. And Fagan, having just crossed the line, or is working his way through the middle of the track here, we'll have to see what happens in terms of how this cycles out and when he takes the white flag. Or more specifically, when he takes the checkered flag, when we hit zeros. We'll determine how much time Duffin and Dalton have to scrap it out. It could be 1 lap. It could be a half a lap. We'll see what happens. But it seems pretty comfortable for Peter Dalton right now. A little bit of a bite of the curb there unsettles the car slightly. Duffin does come in a little bit closer. 1.5 minutes to go. 90 seconds on the clock. And it seems as though we're going to have about 2 laps to go. For these GT4s, or 1 and a bit, as it looks like Tom Fagan is coming through the last corner. This will be his last lap. 1 minute to go as Fagan crosses the line as the leader of this race. This will be the final lap. Dalton, Duffin separated now a little bit more than they certainly were last week, and more than they have been for most of this race as well. 1.2 seconds is the gap there at the front of the GT4s. 13.9 at the front of the GT3s, with Tom Fagan, after an incredible smooth drive today, absolutely no drama from him. Barring any sort of cataclysms for his McLaren, will be holding on. And Dalton seems to be still be a little bit more comfortable here. As we now count down the final seconds of the clock. Dalton with a decent gap. He's going to be just trying to keep it as smooth and consistent as possible without the threat of a lunge or a deep move. As there goes Duffin trying to make it happen. That is probably going to be the move. But we'll have to see if he tries it again, but he'll have to know it's going to have to be a dramatic attack. This is going to be the last lap now. Coming to the white flag for the GT4s, as Fagan has not reached the line yet for his lap. It'll be 1 more lap to go for the GT4s. But just behind, coming into the last corner, it's been a stunning drive from the Irish driver. He took advantage of Saba's misfortune. It is Tom Fagan taking the win overall in the GT3 McLaren. What a drive from him, taking that thing from what many thought would probably not be a win today to the top step of the podium. It's Max Studer going to be coming in behind for P2, rounding out the podium. Coming through the last few corners now, it's going to be Robert Ramsell in the 501 Ferrari coming through the last corner. He takes the checkered flag. It's Fagan, Studer, and Ramsell, P1 through 3. Here at Kyalami overall, we switch back now to Peter Dalton. Coming into Sector 3. And we'll have to see. It's Butler. Did not, or seems to be in the pits. We don't know if he took his stop or not, but is currently listed P7 in his Mustang. Saba will not recover beyond 13th place. It is last place in class, but it is still 13th overall in this field. As the 146 now is going to come across the line. But we're following Dalton. Duffin seems to be just holding where he can now. He's not going to force the attack. He's going to bring this home safely. Dalton on the flashers. He couldn't get it done last week, but he could this week. Peter Dalton is going to take the win in GT4s. It's Matthew Duffin right behind in the Simplay Mercedes. What a show once again from these two. Absolute drama in the GT4s. Darren Yeo is now going to come through, and he's going to round out the podium places for the GT4 class and bring his Mercedes onto the podium there as well. What an unbelievable race we've seen here in Kyalami for the second of our 2 preseason rounds in the ARL Console Multiclass Sunday Series. It's an absolute huge one. Surprise victor and Tom Fagan. Saba in 13th after an unfortunate incident. Max Studer and Robert Ramsell filling it out on the podium in the overall class. Studer is going to be happy with that one. He's going to be a little bit upset, polarizing. Robert Ramsell is going to be thrilled to be on the podium. But once again, it's Dalton, Duffin, and Yo rounding out the top 3 in GT4. It has been a fantastic weekend of action here as we'll take a look at our overall final classifications for a moment. As it seems as though this time the GT4 is not quite as many mishaps in the GT3 category. Only 2 that have fallen behind, as though Clouden seemed to have not even made the start. Or just had a very quiet race. We didn't see much of Clouden last week's pole sitter. We'll take a look at the GT3s here now. Fagan at the front, Studer P2, Ramsell P3. Rounding out the top 5, we have Ampero and Bloxham recovering from that early penalty. In the GT4s, it's Dalton and Duffin, followed by Darren Yo, Gary Leach, and Audgie the Squirrel in P5. And yeah, the McLaren followed by a parade of Mercedes. Overall, good day for Mercedes there. A fantastic day for McLaren, taking the top 2 steps overall and the top step of GT4. But that will be all from me today here at On Sport TV. I'm Catherine Lane. For everybody at ARL and the admin team there, we thank you so much for tuning in. We are going to have a VOD this week that'll go up right away in the server. But yeah, for everyone at ARL, I'm Catherine Lane. Thank you so much for tuning in, and be sure to keep an eye on things for updates on the full season of ARL Consoles Multiclass Sundays. Thank you so much.